So, what's the solution? Some are calling for harm reduction. That's a term that refers to legalizing drugs such as marijuana across the U.S. to end trafficking. Others say this would make illegal substances safer and cheaper for drug users at great cost to society. Joining us now to talk more about this dilemma is well-known jurist, the Honorable Jim Gray. He's a former presiding judge in California who also worked as a federal U.S. prosecutor. Gray's been very active in his efforts to reform U.S. drug laws. And Judge, let me just ask you, was it a moment sitting on the bench where you just had an epiphany and said this isn't working out? I mean, what happened to lead you to have a different point of view?
Well, it actually was an epiphany. I still remember sitting on a bench enforcing another judge's decision with her sentence with regard to a criminal case of a really bad guy. And it turned out that this guy would only, after getting credit for time served, serve another 2 weeks or so in jail. And when it was finished with all of that, he being led back into the lockup, let out a war whoop as if he'd won. And actually, I remember thinking to myself, he has won, because we're spending so much money and our resources prosecuting nonviolent drug offenders. We're not using those resources prosecuting people that are actually causing harm to us. So I decided, who better than a conservative judge in a conservative county like Orange County, California, to speak up about this issue. I've never used illicit drugs. You can legalize them and bless them by every religious leader in town, and I'm still not going to jam cocaine up my nose, and almost no one else is either. But if those are doing it, they're doing it already. So let's recognize that drugs are here to stay, harmful as they can be, but also recognize that at least 90% of the drug problems have nothing to do with the drugs. They're drug prohibition, they're drug money problems. Those we can address like we did with alcohol prohibition when we finally came to our senses and passed the 21st Amendment and repealed alcohol prohibition.
Now, when you were a prosecutor, when you were chasing these guys, when you were on the bench, I mean, initially you must have had strong feelings that you were serving a purpose, but I know you're talking about one specific case, but there must have been a march to that point in time. Was it just, is there a breakdown all along the way? What do you see that is the problem?
Well, I was raised the same way most people are, Mike, to equate heroin, for example, with bad, with evil, with prison, and you didn't really think much about it. I was a Navy JAG attorney involved with the prosecution and defense of these cases, criminal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office, like you said, and on the bench. But once you get on the bench and you see the total picture, you see what is happening, you just start recognizing, for example, that the largest mental health facility in Orange County, Los Angeles County, and probably pretty much every other county is what? It's the county jail. We put so many people that are mentally disabled in there in jail because they're self-medicating with these drugs. Very expensive, both human standpoint as well as financial. There's got to be a better way, and there is. So look, you understand that we don't condone using or abusing drugs, but when it comes down to it, it makes as much sense to me, and I'm a libertarian and proud to say so, for the government to hold me accountable for my actions. That's what a legitimate law enforcement tool is. But as far as controlling what I as an adult put into my body, makes as much sense to put Betty Ford in jail, for example, because she was an alcoholic, as it would have Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin use. It's the same thing. That's a medical issue. Let people come closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of pushing them farther away by criminalizing the conduct. The more people think about it, the more people will understand that.
But let me ask you the big business aspect of this, because it is a big business on several levels. There's the illegal business, there's the big business of prisons, which have just flourished, the prison business, there's the business of government. There's been $1 trillion spent. How do you reform something like this where it's become a big business on so many different levels?
We're doing it right now. Just if we legitimize the discussion, I guarantee you we'll change away from this failed policy of drug prohibition. I call it the biggest failed policy in the history of our country, second only to slavery. I was speaking to 2 sitting congressmen, actually here in Orange County a couple of years ago, and they each one in their own words said, Jim, most people in Washington realize the war on drugs is not winnable, but it's eminently fundable, and they're addicted to the drug war funding. You're talking about a huge enterprise, a lot of government money, and a lot, of course, illegal money as well. So it really comes down to it. We're going to have the drugs in our community. Always have, always will, here and everywhere else around the world. Are we going to have them with criminals or without criminals? Can we control the quality? Can we control the age restrictions? And then people will start realizing we're doing this for our children. The problem is that drug prohibition puts our children in harm's way for two extremely important reasons, which I would see routinely in juvenile court. One is, ask any teenager you find, what is easier for you to get if you want to? Marijuana or alcohol? And they'll all say it's easier to get marijuana because the bad guys don't ask for ID. And then number two, we have drug dealers recruiting children all the time as cheap labor to help sell drugs. And look, if you're going to have a 15-year-old selling drugs in his or her community, who are they going to sell to? You and me? Nonsense. They're going to sell to their 14, 15, 16-year-old peers, thus recruiting more children into this very lifestyle of drug usage and drug selling that we say we're trying to keep away from them. It is caused by drug prohibition. Doesn't work.
Let me ask you this, though, Judge. You mentioned two members of Congress that you talked to about this, but congressmen and even people running for president, I'm going to get tough on drugs. It gets them votes.
That's true. That's true.
How do you change that?
It's always been that way. Well, make it harder for children to get the drugs, take away a whole lot of money from juvenile street gangs and other really bad guys, and use that money instead to pay our teachers, our firefighters, and fix our highways. It's not a hard decision to make. Colorado has done this now. State of Washington has done this now. The nation is going to follow, and the world will follow after that.
Judge Gray, we're just about out of time. We've got maybe a couple of minutes. So briefly, if you can, the people who came before you as a judge, disproportionately black, Hispanic, would you say?
Yes, it does not take a sociologist to go through any jail or prison or courthouse in our country and see that people of color are vastly overrepresented. This is not what our country stands for, but that has been the result of drug prohibition. Yet another reason to change away from that failed policy.
And let me ask you this, because you're in Southern California, a border state with Mexico, the damage that this is doing to the country of Mexico. Can you talk about that?
Yes, you know, again, Mexico does not have a drug problem. We have lost something like 60, 70,000 people to violent deaths in the last 5 years because Presidente Calderon's war on drugs. Having nothing to do with drugs, it's all drug money. And by the way, it's our drug money that has caused those deaths. The corruption, the violence, all drug money. Repeal drug prohibition, regulate and control these drugs, and then bring the users closer to medical professionals. Today, you do not see, for example, Mexican drug cartels raising illegal vineyards in our national forests in competition with Robert Mondavi. They could, but there's no money in it. The same will be true with regard to these other drugs as well. It's the only way we will get these really bad people out of this business. And then all of us can address the drug abuse issues as a medical issue, holding people accountable for their actions. It's not hard.
Judge Jim Gray, thank you for your provocative thoughts. Certainly appreciate you joining us from California.
We'll do it again, and thanks for the opportunity.